Hello, hello, hello. We have a video here from Hayden Rodia called Debating Dean Withers and Parker on Abortion. It's just Parker. This guy's Dean Withers, but this guy's just Parker. So for me, this is really to test if I can logically get behind kind of Hayden here and really remain logically proficient in defending abortion. So I am very anti-abortion, and I want to see if my logic kind of holds up, and if me and this Hayden guy, who I've never seen before, but he seems like a random. I think he's like a Protestant. He's like a debate bro, Protestant debate bro. I don't know what this guy is, but we can do a different video investigating him. We're just kind of using him as a stand-in. We're going to project ourselves onto this debate and see if we could take this debate. So let's begin.
Yeah, I vote for Trump.
Why him?
Largely due to pro-life policies, yeah, so I'm pro-life.
Except, okay, so first contradiction. Trump's not really pro-life. He said leave it up to the state. So I think maybe Hayden's getting in a false dichotomy where, because I thought about this too, I would be okay being a single-issue voter in terms of abortion. For example, if we had a Zionist person who was pro-Israel, except they were 100% anti-abortion, they were going to do everything in their power to stop abortion, I would be okay supporting Israel if we got rid of abortion, because to me, something like abortion holds more value than a few more missiles to Israel, right? I mean, they're going to get their support either way, through the cabinet, through the Senate, through the House. It's more than just the president, right? But I think, all that being said, I think abortion is an important enough issue that I would make a single issue vote thing. That being said, I don't think Trump actually is pro-life. He made this stance coming out in 2016, but then 2020 through 2024, he was actually just leave it up to the state. That's what he said. So he kind of backed off the whole abortion thing, which was really dumb because he was never going to win on that point anyway. He was always going to lose to the Democrats, so I would have just kind of went all the way in and just supported pro-life anyway if I was Trump. Or just don't make the presidential debate about that. Just kind of like don't talk about that as much, because it's just a losing point either way. But Trump is not actually really anti-abortion, so I kind of have to. My perspective would be, don't participate in the false dichotomy presented to you by kind of this stupid political system. You're like, are you going to vote for the guy who kills 5 babies, or are you going to vote for the guy that kills 10 babies? It's like, some people would say logically, they'd be like, well, if I don't do anything, the person who kills 10 babies is going to get elected, so I need to vote in the person that gets 5 babies to save 5 babies. It's like, yeah, you can make that argument, except what you're really doing is you're assenting to the person who kills 5 babies, where I would assent to neither. And you could say, yeah, but people are going to die. And I would say, that's true, but I'm not killing them. I'm holding on to my moral principles, and I'm not going to assent and consent to abortion killers, even if it's 5 as opposed to 10, because they're still killing babies at the end of the day. And you're basically consenting and helping someone like that get into power. And that's not really how a vote is supposed to be used anyway. When you vote for someone, you're really consenting to them governing you. That's kind of the concept of the vote. So, like, votes aren't meant to be a tool to disenfranchise a political opposite or political opponent. That's kind of an abuse of the purpose of the vote. And ultimately, I would, because I think abortion is such a big deal, I would have to stand on moral principles, and I'd have to say any baby killing, any support for baby killing at all, immediately takes away my vote, and I'd rather vote in a random third-party person than support a baby killer. Even if they're not going to get in, at the end of the day, you may never win, but you have to stand on your moral principles, and you have to kind of stand firm in that and never compromise with the enemy, basically, especially when it's something big like abortion. Okay, but let's get into the actual debate.
He's generally more favorable towards pro-life policies compared to Harris, so.
Oh, this would be fun.
I know it's a lie, but
Amanda pays $6 on PayPal cutting these jobs. So real, she's just looking at that. So, if you're pro-life,
this boy toy.
you think that elective abortion.
What are you doing with your hair, bro?
Yes.
Then every single reason why elective lethal abortion is morally wrong.
Why elective abortion is wrong?
Name every reason.
It's the unjustified taking of human life.
Phenomenal.
True. Although saying unjustified, it kind of implies a value judgment, right? Because whether or not something is just or whether it's unjust kind of implies a moral standard, which basically means that if you're in a debate with someone who doesn't share your worldview or your set of values, then it's not going to be easily communicable to anyone else. It'd be better to appeal to something that people can broadly get behind. But I also understand that really the debate about abortion is whether or not you're Christian, and whether or not you value the soul within individuals, whether or not you think the soul itself within a human being has immense value or not. And that's really the crux of the abortion debate.
Okay. And when you say that it's the unjust termination of human life, that's wrong. You are entailing the rights violation. So let me ask you this question.
Well, no, it's more than human rights. Just saying something is just or unjust. Murder is just or unjust has nothing to do with human rights. Human rights doesn't have a totality on the justification or the grounding for what constitutes just or unjust. Like, that's kind of the problem, is you're just asserting that, well, that's because it's a human rights violation. No, actually it's not. It's because it's like violating moral law. It's violating God's law.
Moral value.
The fact that it is a living human organism.
Okay, so now you've made your principle clear. If one is a living human organism, they get sufficient moral value to be granted the right to life, and when you unjustly kill them, it is murder. So let me ask you this question. Okay, wait, actually, I want to go in a different direction. Do you think that all innocent human life has an identical amount of value?
I would say that all innocent human organisms have a right not to be murdered.
Yeah.
That's actually a really good point, because he's trying to conflate two things. He's trying to say that because there's a slight difference in value in human life, that means that it somehow allows or could unallow, or it somehow overlaps or overrides the principle that people and souls in general shouldn't be killed. Because basically what he's going to say is he's like, oh, what if you have 3 abortions versus 1 human life, right? Or 1 person who's fully alive. Would you support abortion then? And it's like, well, there's kind of 2 moral quandaries going on. The first one is, do humans have differences in the amount of value? Which doesn't really get at the main principle at question, is whether or not abortion is wrong, whether or not taking a human being with a soul and murdering it, right, is wrong. Those are 2 really different questions. And we could maybe, let's say hypothetically I agreed, and I'm like, you know what, there is a slight difference in human value across humans. Someone who's 80 years old only has 20 years to live. Someone who's 20 years old still has 80 years to live. Therefore, we're going to value that person more slightly. But does that mean suddenly we're going to start trading 7 grannies for 1 young person? No, right? Because what you're doing then is you're saying, let's trade 7 souls for 1 person, and ultimately minute differences in the quality of life or the quote-unquote value of an individual is dwarfed by the orders of magnitude larger of the human soul itself. So the human soul itself has infinitely more value than comparing the differences between individuals. That's what I would say. And it's ultimately because of the soul, right? So, and also it's not true that the reason abortion is wrong is because humans have value, or because there's some quantifiable value that exists on some kind of scale, some quantifiable scale that makes murder wrong, right? Murder is wrong because of more like deontological principles, less of like a mechanistic value judgment, like where I'm like, oh, this person's worth 101 points, but anything over 50 is wrong to murder them. So it's conflating the moral justification of abortion as being based on their value, where it's not. It's based on their soul, and it's based on the immorality of murder itself, not whether or not a human passes a certain threshold of value. And that needs to be like clearly articulated by this guy here.
But do they all have the identical moral value? For instance, I'm as morally valuable as you are morally valuable as a fetus was morally valuable.
Well, when you're talking about value, that would be a different thing.
Right, so he's kind of saying it right now, but there's value, and then there's abortion is wrong, and murder is wrong. That's what I'm trying to say. There's humans can have varying amounts of value, maybe, or we could say they don't. It's irrelevant. Murder and abortion is wrong on principle.
From a right to live, we agree on
Well,
that.
it's the value that grants the right to life. If something isn't morally valuable, it's not going to have the right to life.
Sure, and I would be willing to say that a born human being has equal value to a preborn human being if we're talking about value being what we're using to define as having a right not to murder.
I wouldn't really say that, because you're kind of giving into his argument.
But number one, unalive 10 cryogenically frozen human zygotes that are biologically alive and are human. But number two, unalives one newborn. Which button are you pressing?
Why do I have to press one button?
Because if you don't press either of the buttons, everyone dies, 10 zygotes, one newborn, and you.
Okay, so he thinks he's clever. He's like, oh, look, you're going to commit abortion because you're willing to, you don't want to kill 10 zygotes. You don't want to kill 10 zygotes. They're literally just random cells in a jar somewhere, frozen in some IVF clinic. It's like, haha, you're a weirdo. So, but it doesn't really prove anything. It's just a kind of a weird hypothetical.
Okay, just want to make sure I got the question correct. Is it okay if I repeat back to you? Okay, so you're saying that I have to push one of two buttons, there's no other option. If I don't push any of the buttons, then everyone dies.
This is good practice, being rigorous.
In which case, 10 frozen embryos.
Like repeating back what someone says is a overpowered tactic.
Then sounds like a newborn human dies. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Look at this smirk little bitch.
I was to say that I pushed the button that would ultimately result in the death of the newborn being, which if I'm trying to preserve the maximum amount of living human organisms would be the route that I would want to take, right? Let's say that I choose to do that. Can you tell me how that would justify abortion? Can you tell me how?
That's a good point, yeah. So first of all, he can maybe point out, let's say that that's ridiculous. Say that's somehow ridiculous. Oh, you would kill a full-grown baby and you would care more about the zygotes? That's ridiculous. First of all, that doesn't disprove abortion. That's completely unrelated. You didn't prove anything other than you made something look or appear on the surface to be absurd. That doesn't prove anything. And then second of all, it's actually not logically inconsistent. It's perfectly logically consistent. You're saying the 10 zygotes have souls in them, and the souls have such immense value that those 10 souls are worth more than really one human. That's what you're saying.
How that would justify abortion?
Why do you say if?
At first I said...
Well, it's hypothetical. He's allowed to say if.
And then I asked how that would justify abortion.
So hey, we haven't gone yet.
Okay.
We haven't gotten around to my justification so far as why I think that elective lethal abortion is prior to given more morally permissible. The reason why I ask you this question is to demonstrate absurdity. In fact, the absurdity...
How's it absurd?
That you value 10 cryogenically frozen...
What makes it absurd? It's absurd by your standard of, that seems weird though. You care more about zygotes? It's like, well, if you step into my shoes for a second, imagine that all of those zygotes, yeah, they look on the surface like a bunch of cells, and to you and to a random atheist, they're going to look just like dumb little cells. But to us and to God, they have a soul in them, which has immense value and immense potential. And it's kind of a human thing to get caught up in the minute details of biology and the details of the differences in like IQ. Oh, he has 110 IQ. That means he's more valuable than the guy with 80 IQ and shit like that. That's not really how God values or judges human beings. He judges them based on their soul, right? So he's not looking at, oh, is this person taller or more attractive, or are they older or younger, or how biologically developed they are. He's looking at really the more innate qualities of the human soul. And that's kind of what we should aspire to as well.
The fact that I value 10 living organisms over one living organism?
True.
Just a follow.
What does that matter though? I mean, you're just randomly asserting that because it's more complex biologically, therefore it has more value. Let's say we agree. Oh, this is completely hypothetical, but let's say you're right. Just to prove that it doesn't matter. Let's say you're right that a multicellular, more developed, closer to being alive, more potential years inside them, human being is more valuable than a zygote. Let's say that's true. I would still say that even if it's slightly more valuable than, say, a zygote, ultimately it's going to be dwarfed by the value of the soul, which magnified by quantity, scaled up by a quantity of 10, a factor of 10, means it's going to immediately dwarf any differences in value, like in terms of comparison, like trying to compare human lives. And also at the end of the day, it is not like really a scalar value, because it's not like the difference is like zero point 0.2 from, like, let's say a human is valued at 100, and then differences in humans are like 0.3, like an error of 0.3 based on the value or the quality of that human life. Then someone could hypothetically say, well, after 33, no, it'd be more than that, 333 lives, you could then make those lives more valuable than a soul, right? But it doesn't work that way. There is no translation from quality of a human life, how developed it is, or how smart it is, or how many years it has. There is no translation from that along some kind of quantifiable scalar system to the value of a soul. There's no way to go from the biological details to translating that to equating to the value of a soul. So there's no way you get from zygote and babies and fully adult humans to being worth more than the human soul. That's the problem.
A follow-up question on that. When you say just hang on. When you said that it was absurd, by what standard are you judging it to be absurd?
Yeah, we'd be judging it to be absurd based upon like my preferences.
Okay. My
That's awesome, dude. Nice debate tactic. My preferences. People unironically say that. Well, it's my preferences. Okay, so you're just a subjectivist. So we're supposed to care about. So this entire argument isn't even a universal. It's just you expressing your preferences. Then why are you on here trying to do a debate? Why would anyone listen to you? That's not an argument. My preferences. It's my preferences. You can't. A worldview is not just my preferences. That's not how worldviews work. Oh, one sec. All right, let's let these two yap.
If I don't interrupt me, I'll describe it to you. You have to be able to.
You just want to not give me a chance to answer. Yeah, just one question. It looks like I'm.
So you don't have to be able to have a chance to speak. Debate in general. This is your response, right? I feel as if you're trying to say what you say. That's how you have to do it. Is how is it absurd, right? Or what determines absurdity? I told you that I'm indexing the absurdity to my preferences. You then told me, well, what if you have different preferences?
Okay, you can't do that in a debate. You can't just say, well, duh, my preferences.
Of whose preferences mean more. So you're right.
So you don't have a universal worldview.
Right. So here's the next step. Okay. And I want to take it in this route. Let's see here.
That's if you do that, if you just say, well, the only reason XYZ is because of my preferences, you're just basically admitting that your arguments are only going to work for you, and that nobody else is really going to be able to take anything away from your arguments because they don't share your preferences, right? Or you're making an argument that only works for people that share your preferences, which is not actually how you're supposed to do debate. Debates are supposed to be based on, yeah, you bring in your worldview, but you ultimately have to back your worldview up with logic. And when you're speaking to an opponent, your opponent isn't going to share your preferences, your exact preferences. So you need to make arguments that bridge the gap between your worldviews and appeal to logic, try to look for contradictions, do internal critiques, stuff like that, appeal to normativity, look to things that the crowd might resonate with, make compelling arguments and perspectives from within your worldview. You don't just have to fall back on, well, these are my preferences and I'll do me and you do you. Like that's not actually an argument. That's not a legitimate debate tactic. You can't do that.
The exact same amount of moral value are all deserving of a similar human life. And I want to see how far you're willing to take this.
Trump will be terrible for America. I kind of agree. Although that's kind of subjective. It doesn't really mean anything.
If there was a human zygote that were to remain a human zygote for the rest of its existence and not grow into anything more, not have any...
I just don't really care about Trump. It's kind of dumb.
would you value it the same as you value yourself, or me, or anyone else?
Yes.
Okay. Now please tell me why.
Why does he think this is a win? These little soylent cuck boys. They think they're so like smart. They're so smarmy.
As long as it's a part of our species. Meanwhile, you don't think you're doing any.
Okay, but he's reducing. But what this slimy little Dean kid is really doing is he's trying to. Okay, so there's a grounding. So human lives have value. I think we can all agree on that. But what he's doing is he's trying to take the grounding for that value, and he's slimily trying to shift the foundation for why humans have value onto things like because they're of the same species. Well, because they're multicellular organisms, because they look like us, because XYZ. He's trying to shift it to like a biological, like quantifiable argument, justification for why humans have value, which then he could, like, once that's established, he can then do all these silly little logical tricks. But ultimately, it's not based on whether or not they're of the same species or not. It has nothing to do with like class and phylum from biologies, because you're basically just saying that the only reason humans are valuable is because they are of a biological species, because we share the same biological species. That's not why we think humans have value. It's because we're on team human. That's not why. It's because we have a soul, and because God implanted us with something of immense value, right?
When you brush your teeth, you'll 400 trillion life forces that are of a similar size, standard, and growth potential as that unicellular organ.
Yeah, but that's not the basis for human life or human value. That's not the basis for abortion.
Sure. So when I brush my teeth, I'm not killing any living organisms. And if you reject the standard that all living human organisms are equally valuable and equally have a right not to be murdered, then I would argue you end up with some repugnant consequences. Now, the problem with your line of questioning here is that you still haven't established an absolute standard of rationality by which you're going to judge my answers or yours outside of your personal preference. And if your personal preference is the only standard you're judging my answers by, then all I have to do is judge your answers by my personal preference, and there's no ultimate arbiter, is there?
True. Well, yeah, and this is a broader critique on anyone who says my preferences, because you just go down a route of subjectivism where, well, we all just have our own preferences. It's like, well, then you recede the ability to do debate, because debate assumes that we can compare each other's worldviews using logic. You can't just retreat into a statement of like, well, they're my preferences, so duh. And you also don't have an arbiter on what is universally true. You can't make universal truth claims if you only have your individual preferences. That means that's like my truth, right? It's like, oh, it's my truth because that's true for me. It's like, well, no, there is the truth, and then we can use logic and debate and argument to arrive at this universal truth. If you reject that principle, then you reject the ability to do logic and debate in the first place. But I mean, that's almost too broad of a critique. That's too fundamental, probably for this random smirky rage bait Dean kid to understand, would be my guess.
So, hey, as I already described, when we want to use our preferences to determine what's certain and what's not.
It sounds like a gay liberal. Like only a liberal would say that.
However, the absolute standard for rationale would just be these three consequential classical laws of logic. And we typically judge the internal validity of.
Well, yeah, you can do. Well, he's saying preferences. He's conflating preferences with worldview. You can have a worldview, and you can also have. But it's not a preference to say to assert a worldview, because the major difference between a worldview and preferences is when you say preferences, what you're really implying is that these are only true for me, meaning I'm not going to make any claims about what other people do or what other people say or how other people are. These are just the way that I choose to live my life for me, and it's not universal. Whereas a worldview says that what your preferences are universal and they apply to everybody, meaning that if somebody else engages in something that goes against your preferences, like they commit murder or they commit abortion, then a person who only goes on preferences is going to say, well, that's okay because I'm doing my preference and they're doing their preference, and that's good for everybody. And a person with an actual worldview would say, I'm going to project my preferences onto them, and what they're doing is wrong. So you're still making a universal statement, and you're still adhering to the laws of like universal truth and logic. You're still playing by those rules, which are necessary for conducting an effective debate.
An argument based upon an internal contradiction.
And you can do, but that only works for worldviews. So it's not really how preferences work.
will be true. However, to go ahead and finish off what I was originally saying to you, you said
Essentially,
this
what
is
you're saying is that it's going to end up violating your own intuition by the use of like some sort of.
It's called internal critique. You guys are dumb. You don't even know the terms you're using. It's internal critique of someone's worldview, but that only works for worldviews, not for preferences. Preferences aren't a real thing. That's not a real thing in debate, as to appeal to one's preference.
Okay.
Because you're asserting a position of subjectivism, which is that truth is not universal, which means debate is impossible. That's ultimately the contradiction at play.
Oh my goodness, I'm muted again.
we agreed that in order for us to have a fair conversation, we both
These
have
little
to agree.
TikTok edgelords, they think that they're like king of the castle. They get to just mute anybody anytime they disagree with them, and then they get to go on these giant, like, rambling, prattling speeches to their entire audience while you're muted. It's really gay.
So to finish speaking, I allowed you to do that.
I was just trying to.
This is so obviously like a one-sided exchange where this TikTok edgelord just has total control. He's acting like he's playing fairly, but you're just 100% just muting him whenever the fuck he wants. He barely even has a chance to speak. So obviously one-sided.
Yeah, that was
Like only a little bitch would do this. Like real men wouldn't go around muting each other and then asserting the moral high ground. I let you talk. It's like such bitch behavior. It's like if you need to mute the other person, you're clearly like some. He's like that kid from fuck, what's that really popular show called? The one I don't watch because I'm not a loser. What's that damn show called? The super popular show. One sec. I just had a brain fart. What's that super popular show with the woman who like tames the dragon? What's that show called?
That sounds like you're referring to How to Train Your Dragon.
No. It's the super raunchy show that's set in like the medieval times that all like the women fawn over. It's like super popular. What's the name of it?
It sounds like you're talking about Game of Thrones.
That's it. Yeah,
The
yeah,
show
yeah.
is-
Okay. Game of Thrones. Now how's that relating to what I was saying? Couldn't remember. He's like that blonde kid from Game of Thrones who has to pull random bullshit moves and just like throw his power and weight around as this like TikTok edgelord. I control the stream looking ass bro.
bad for cutting off.
Oh, no, you're good, Parker. If he's
Still muted.
It's just a bitch move. Anyone who does that, total bitch.
So you told me that you value a unicellular organism that had no growth potential and would remain a unicellular organism for the rest of its existence as long as it's a part of our species. So tell me why.
But that's actually wrong. It's not because it's a part of our species. You're making this a biological argument where it's whether or not it's multicellular or whether or not it's part of our species. You're just asserting for me that it's a biological argument. I'm not. I'm saying that there's a soul inside these zygotes, inside these human beings, and that is what gives it value, not whether or not it's part of a species or not. So it's actually a very slimy debate tactic.
Similar genome in the sense of the structure of our DNA.
Has nothing to do with the genome.
Are, I guess, similar enough
We're not
for all
atheists.
to classify as a part of your same species is morally valuable. I find that to be insane, and I'd ask you for your reasons why.
So just to clarify the question again.
Yeah, this kid doesn't know how logic works.
Human organism at the zygote stage, the one cell stage.
Like, okay, someone having a different worldview doesn't make it absurd. Because someone puts value on the soul or about humans as not as a species or not as a multicellular organism. Someone who views the value of human life being tied to our soul and the metaphysical, not the biological and not the material, that doesn't make them absurd because they have a different worldview. Or in Dean's words, because they have different preferences. Someone having different preferences doesn't make them absurd in of itself. And he was talking all about internal critiques, but he hasn't done a single internal critique on this guy, Hayden, at all. Like, he hasn't done any internal critiques. He's just said, I think that's absurd. Explain why it isn't. He actually doesn't have to say anything. He doesn't have to explain why it's not absurd. You haven't proved why it is absurd. He doesn't have to defend himself from anything. He hasn't made any effective arguments.
Third forms of one cellular life.
That is the only stage it will exist in ever.
Yes, and you're asking me to compare that to the value of something that is also one cell but doesn't have unique human DNA, so something like a horse at the zygote stage or something like that.
Actually, no, the question I'm asking you is why is DNA that is sufficiently similar to yourself to be categorized as a Homo sapiens sapien grant moral value?
Because it's made in the image of God.
There you go.
Okay. And then, do I have a chance to examine your position yet?
Almost. There's one more thing that I got Parker would want to do as it relates to Christian.
What's actually wrong with that though? He hasn't pointed out anything wrong, and he should have just led with that. Like this guy was tiptoeing around it. He was saying, "Oh, a human organism." Well, not really. It's because ultimately, it's because it is made in the image of God and it has immense value. God has assigned immense value through the soul. Humans are awarded a unique property, having a soul that animals don't have.
I mean, you can run your thing on him. I just yell one line.
And this is a good point. This is a good reminder, guys, that it actually is based in the theology, because this Dean kid, he actually did a pretty effective job at forcing Hayden to make it about theology. And it proves that you can't really defend things like abortion or genocide or these kinds of moral atrocities we see in the world, pedophilia, transgender. You can't really defend these things effectively just based on first principles or based on random standards like humanism or like rationalism or any of this bullshit. You actually need to be Christian. The only way you'll get these moral principles to actually hold up effectively is if you're a Christian. I don't think you can actually effectively defend, justify, ground positions like being pro-life unless you're Christian, unless you rely on Christian tenets. And I wouldn't, if I was this guy Hayden, I wouldn't run away from that. I would lean into it and be like, yeah, this is my worldview. It informs everything about the way I see the world, and it's going to have a massive implication on how I do debates. Not try to rely on more biology, because you will lose, because it's not about the biology.
Okay, fantastic.
Leave it up to you. I've been asking things of you. You get to choose it.
Yeah, well, just a quick clarification. When I was trying to ask a question, it actually wasn't going to be about your position. It was just going to be about the course of the conversation going forward. So I wasn't actually interrupting to try to ask a question that would help Mike you. I was just trying to clarify sort of the terms of the future conversation. So I just want to clarify that.
Should be Christ is
Now that I
king.
get a chance to examine your view, what would you consider makes a human being, actually any being valuable? What would you consider gives a being a right not to
People are hating on this guest. It's hilarious.
So hold a conscience to distribute moral values sufficient to correct
An invisible man in the sky. I love that argument. That's such a good argument. That's such a really good argument, guys. That's definitely not a straw man, is say that a guy in the sky shouldn't determine morals. Prove God is real. You can actually do that. That's actually possible. There's like 12 different arguments you can use for God. So you can actually prove God is real. But yeah, dude, I love TikTok arguments are so insightful, guys. They're so intellectually stimulating. You guys are so cool in TikTok comments. Like, you guys, the true intellectual, super, like, have a little self-awareness. You're in a TikTok comment section, you're gonna act like you have this like moral superiority, like you're gonna lay down these gotchas and you're gonna be so smart. Like, come on,
Dude, you can't force your religious beliefs on half the population. That's mean.
Yeah, so one question I have that, under that contract, can you give me an example then of beings that would fit that?
So, okay, now what can Hayden really do? He can point out that this biology argument isn't grounded. And then the way he can do that is he can poke holes in it and he can like prove that it's not really based on anything at all, that there is no real standard, that they're just asserting random things. Like it's multicellular, it's a human being. And then he can point out how these are just arbitrary things. So let's see if he does that.
Sure. Like a fetus at about 20 to 24 weeks, in accordance with the current medical consensus on when
Appeal to consensus, to fallacy. Also appeal to authority.
it would be an example of an individual or an entity that comes up just like you and I. You.
Okay, so yeah, just clarification on that. Let me make sure I got your position right. So it should be that you value any life form as a conjunction between past, present, and future subjective experiences.
And that's actually a really good point. This is smart. He's forcing him into a position where he actually has to define his position effectively. Really, which is very hard for the biologist person to do because they don't have any actual objective standard. And this is really where Christians shine in argumentation. This is where Christians do really well, is we have clear foundational principles that we can fall back on and operate on and articulate clearly. But these random biologists, rationalists, empiricists, goobers, they don't really have anything that they can point to objectively as their foundation. So when you kind of push them and you're like, well, what is your foundation for human life? What actually gives humans life? What is it that gives the humans the right to live? then they're like, they just point to like random things, and they'll try to like justify it with like clever sounding words, but then as soon as you poke holes, you realize, oh, there is actually nothing.
Conjunction would be applied to grant the right to life in special sense to humans, but that gets into like.
But see, he's already like, you can hear his voice is shaky. He's not as smarmy. He's not as like he's not as smug as he was before. And that's because he doesn't actually really have a strong foundation here. He's just kind of waffling. He's just kind of making stuff up as he goes along. And it's really, if he was self-aware, he would reflect like, oh wait, I actually don't have like a very stable foundation for what I count to be human life. I don't actually have an effective counterposition.
A lot of nonsense. So like for all intents and purposes, that'd be the position. Would entail ethical veganism. Might take it down that road. And that's just, I'd say, the easiest position.
This is floundering.
But the water could get muddy.
This is like, well, it doesn't really matter. I don't know. Just as for all intents and purposes, we'll just say humans have value. I mean, why not? Like that's a great argument.
Then it could hold like another clarification. You also have to be human.
These are just arbitrary.
Yeah, just another
Okay, so just a question on that then. If you had
That was a bunch of nothing. It was just waffling.
saving 10 adult pigs or one newborn human being, which would you choose?
It'd be the newborn human being.
Absolutely.
The reason that we already listed.
What's that reason? Maybe I missed it.
Yeah,
Yeah, the conjunction of human. They need a
Doesn't
So we also have
just
Was it based on their rationality? What's it actually based on? That's a question.
don't all the adult pigs also have a conjunction between past or present and future subjective experiences?
Yeah, but
They
how
don't
would
need the second conjunction also being human.
Oh, okay. I see. Okay.
Why do they have to be human?
That might help me understand your position.
That's another good question. Is like, why do they actually have to be human? All right, I'm gonna pause really quickly. All right, we're back. And this is how you win arguments against these types of people: is you push them on their foundation, prove that they have none. That's the most effective way to win as a Christian apologist or a Christian debater. Is prove that your enemies don't actually have any meaningful foundation for making any of the grand, audacious claims that they make, like Christians are absurd. Oh, really? On what standard? Oh, well, biology. Oh, really? What specifically? But it's human. Okay, so that's circular.
If I offered you guys, and I'm not going to give you guys this money, but just take it as hypotheticals for the sake of sort of examining your position here. If I offered you $1 million plus a plastic water bottle that's empty, what would you offer to pay me for that?
Wait, say that one more time?
Yeah, if I offered you $1 million in addition to a plastic water bottle that was completely empty, how much would you offer to pay me for that?
Anything under $1 million?
Okay, so like roughly $1 million.
Yeah.
Oh, for the million. Okay.
We'll get there. So like $999.
I was confused by the question.
$999, you make a dollar profit.
Yeah, I mean, well, obviously that
I don't know where this is going. I've never heard this.
We wouldn't actually be willing to do that in real terms because there's plenty of opportunity costs. You have to account liability, other charges.
Okay, but roughly would $999
He's like, what if there's tax? That's hilarious.
How about this? We just have this principle. I'd offer to pay you anything that would allow me profit.
Okay, let me maybe rephrase that.
What is
like in reality that would
okay, let me rephrase that.
These dumb idiots.
What is the value of $1 million plus an empty plastic water bottle, roughly? Okay, thank you.
No, but this is actually wrong because he's doing exactly what I was talking about earlier, where he's saying that the value of a soul and the value of like comparing different types of organisms somehow exists on the same scale on which they can quantifiably compare to each other, which is not what God would say. God has a completely different standard for measuring the value of human life. He doesn't use biological complexity or intelligence or the number of years or how beautiful someone is. He uses a completely different standard. So this is actually kind of a bad route to go for, this Hayden guy, but maybe he's not theologically grounded as I thought he was.
Is the value of a plastic water bottle and a crushed pop can? Okay, and what is the value of $1 million plus a crushed pop can? Okay. Gotcha. So the reason that I brought that up is because it seems to me that when you say a human who has a conjunction between past, present, and future subjective experiences has value enough to not be murdered, but every single other non-human animal that has that same conjunction, we can go ahead and kill for food, or we can go ahead and kill to help the environment or something like that. And it seems to me that the part that's providing all of the value and the union between the being and the conjunction of past, present, and future subjective experiences is the human part, isn't it?
No, it'd be both of them together.
Yeah. And
That's what a conjunct is.
Yeah.
No, but my question is, when we talk about other non-human animals that also have the conjunction.
Can I give you an example?
Sure,
If
go
it's
for it.
a zygote, I wouldn't care about killing a zygote. You can kill a trillion zygotes and I wouldn't give a shit. If I slap a zygote, you're going to prison, right?
And then like additionally one other thing is like I'm agnostic on ethical so like maybe it is wrong.
What's he saying? He's basically saying that, okay, there's a conjunct necessary to demonstrate human value. It has to have human experiences and it has to have the state of being human. If it's human without the experiences, no value, kill zygotes all day. But if it has experiences, but it's not under the species of a human, like a pig, where it has experiences, it's alive, but it's not. I mean, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you could just. There's nothing really in there that's you're going to find a contradiction in.
Yeah, but like we would still say that like we would rather save one more baby over 10, right? That's not Alright, and we can have our separate discussions on like veganism and stuff like that. But having a difference in value between humans and non-humans.
Are you guys vegans?
And then another perspective on why
This guy thinks he's pretty. He actually looks really weird. He looks ugly.
maybe is that I care sufficiently much more about the second condition of the conjunct, that being their future capabilities, but it's going to be entirely predicated on past or present.
Well, just one question there. If it's about
future abilities on past or present abilities, present that in a fetus, like in a fetus at 24 weeks, 74 baby, are going to...
There's a bigger problem, which is it's arbitrary. It's completely arbitrary. Just asserting that human experiences matter more than animal experiences, which... Is that just a subjective preference because we're human, right? So that's really the problem, right? Is the only reason we value humans because we ourselves are human, making it a subjective value set that we only have because we just happen to be human. If we were pigs, we would all think aborting pigs is murder, right? So ultimately you fall into a subjectivist perspective where it's only because us as humans and our preferences as humans, right? So that's kind of the problem. You can have this conjunct as like, well, they have to have human experiences and they have to be human. If one's weighted more than the other, I don't really care.
Considerably more valuable than a pig. However, you still hold that axiomatic truth that being the future.
Is it axiomatic? Is that all you're relying on?
So let's try this then. So same scenario you mentioned earlier, where you can either save those 10 pigs or the one newborn human. But you know that one newborn human has some sort of birth defect where they're actually guaranteed to die at about 2 years old. So you can't really appeal to them having a future conscious experience that exceeds that of a pig, since consciousness is more of a spectrum than a dividing line, something that increases over time, increases with development. Which would you choose then, knowing that newborn human being isn't going to develop past age 2, die at age 2?
I don't see why this would be determined. We would still say the human. I'd rather say the human.
And doesn't that expose though that what's providing all the values of humanity and not the conjunction?
No. Providing the values, those traits together. That's how conjunction works.
No, but what I'm pointing out though is when I take those same
in conjunction, I just explained to you, I wouldn't care if you killed an infinite level of human zygotes. Right, they have that human, right, but they don't have the sentience. You understand that you could say from both perspectives, right, that one's carrying the weight of the other, they're both carrying it together. That's how conjunction works.
But the sentience is pretty clearly not what's mattering here, is it?
What? I just explained specifically sentience plus the fact that they're human, right?
And the humans doing all the work there.
No, it's not. I just explained in the context of a human zygote. I don't care if you were to kill an infant instead of human zygotes.
I would like to raise a point to demonstrate.
Oh, what's really going on here? He's basically saying, if you have a whole bunch of sentience from these pigs, and you have a bunch of babies that really aren't sentient because they're never going to develop past the age of 2, then you don't care about the... But he's saying it's a conjunct, which is really messy. It's just a messy position. You're just saying, well, it has to have this conjunct. It has to both be sentient and it has to be human. You could form a better hypothetical where you could say, would you rather 100 babies who would never pass the age of 2 or 1 human regular life? Because then you could just say, well, if you choose the babies, then what you're really saying is that, well, we care more about the quantity of human life. But if you choose the human, what you're really saying is, I care more about the sentience, right? But it's ultimately, this is kind of pointless because you're just comparing 2 arbitrary standards, one being the quantity of a species, which we happen to share, and then the other one being sentience, which is also just an arbitrary standard that exists on a completely arbitrary spectrum.
Like how much sentience matters. And I think I can relay this point to you in a way that you might be able to agree. So let's just assume that the entirety of the species...
Like, I don't care how much sentience a robot or an animal has. I don't think it deserves to live simply because it has sentience. I don't think that gives it moral value. And if it did, let's say hypothetically it did, that would still have nothing to do with abortion. That would have nothing to do with the moral oughts of how we're supposed to treat other human beings under God's law. Those are 2 completely different policies, 2 completely different moral judgments.
Remains the same. However, humans evolved in such a way to not deploy any sentience. We were meat bags on the floor. In this alternative world, who would you rather save? 10 of the meat bag non-sentient humans, or 1 cow?
So just one question here. If I assume that worldview,
This is just dumb.
then Christianity would necessarily not be true. Do you recognize that, right?
Well,
Because
Christianity...
you're assuming macroevolution, which would contradict the biblical consensus.
Okay, wait.
This is also, I mean, he didn't really need to do that. He's right. And this is just kind of like a nuke on the conversation, but he didn't really need to do that. I mean, you didn't have to get into... I mean, he should have stated that at the beginning. He should have been like, yeah, I don't believe in evolution. So when you guys appeal to sentience and biological complexity, I don't care about that, and I don't even believe in it the same way that you do. You should have brought that up at the beginning. It's kind of, yeah, it's kind of not cool, but whatever.
Evolution contradicts Genesis?
Believing that the Earth is millions of years old and it wasn't created in 6 days is an obvious...
These guys sound like they've never heard that position before. Whoa, you don't believe in evolution, bro? Yeah, that's a fairly complete... tons of people have that. That's a very Protestant position, very common. Some Orthodox think that way too. Catholics tend to be more pro-evolution. I'm not entirely sure. I don't know. I'm not entirely sure one way or the other. I think but they're both fairly common positions. You shouldn't be like freaking out that some people think that. It's a fairly normal thing to think. Like, plenty of people are skeptical of what people call modern science. Scientists say that the Earth is billions of years old. Tons of people are rightfully skeptical of modern science. That's fairly normal. It shouldn't be shamed on because you don't trust what some random group of scientists say. And it's just a theory. That's the other part too, is like, these are theories. These are not scientific laws or facts that, humans are billions of years old. There's plenty of holes, like the lack of intermediary species. Some of the people often appeal to like tectonic plates and varying depths of the Earth's crust, Earth layers. Like, they'll appeal to archaeology. But then there's also holes in that where like random fissures will form overnight that apparently are supposed to take 40 million years to form and shit like that. So there's enough shakiness where you shouldn't freak out that anyone has a different perspective on that. You should be like, okay, nope, some people believe that, and you should kind of work with that. But I won't even really bring up evolution versus creationism because it's just a completely messy topic that has nothing to do with abortion.
So you'll get different numbers depending on how you go through the chronological order of events in the Bible, but I would say less than 25,000 years is what you probably have to answer if you believe in a literal Genesis.
Wait, so you deny science completely and totally.
No, he denies what a group of people who claim to be authorities on science say. Really, when you say, oh, you don't believe in science, that's not really an appeal to objective science, because it's not like you went out and you did the science yourself and you came back and you looked at the papers and you did all the studies and you read all the reports yourself and you came to this logical conclusion on your own. When people like Parker say, oh, I only care about, you're denying science, you're an idiot. It's like, well, you didn't look at the science. You're just trusting what some guy in your school, really your biology teacher, your whatever teacher, your history teacher tells you is science. So really it's an appeal to authority. And often these are just theories put together by people, and they're not always, and it's not rock solid. Like, it's not intuitively, logically some rock solid perfect thing that makes perfect sense. Like, yeah, I think if you doubt that the earth is round, I think that's pretty retarded, because there's other ways to verify that outside of an appeal to authority. And the presentation of the theory itself is pretty rock solid, like it's hard to really disagree with. But the theory of evolution really is more of a theory. It's hard to verify what happened hundreds of millions of years ago. There's nothing you can really appeal to today on Earth that proves definitively that the theory of evolution is definitively true, right? Like, Earth is round, yeah, you can do plenty of tests. You can go in a balloon. You can literally buy a balloon and go up and prove that the Earth is round, right? Like, if everyone who went up to a spaceship is just lying and saying that it's not round, you think everyone's lying, everyone's in on it? That's what you would have to say, right? And there's plenty of people who've breached the upper atmosphere who can see the curvature of the Earth for themselves, right? It's not that hard to do. But with evolution, because you're speculating and conjecturing on things that happened hundreds of millions of years ago, there's actually no way to really prove it one way or the other without relying on these very highly complex scientific phenomena, which get outlined in these reports, which then become uninterpretable by the majority of people, and therefore you have to kind of rely on an appeal to authority to justify these theories of evolution. And either way, you should recognize that this theory isn't perfectly rock solid, and there's always going to be people who agree or disagree with it, and that's not a crazy thing for you to like spurg out and yell like, whoa, he doesn't believe in evolution. Yeah, that's a fairly normal thing.
Just because you're biblical, you said so, that's like actually
Hey, you only believe in evolution because your middle school authority says so? Whoa. Looks like you're just as an appeal to authority as we are.
Is science based on uniformity of nature?
What do you mean by uniformity of nature?
That nature
True.
will act in the future as it has in the past?
No, what we're saying is it's likely to. Right? So I'm not saying
Oh, it's likely? No, that's retarded. So it isn't. This is a common. Is it Descartes? Fuck, I can't remember. Let's go look it up again, guys. I don't want to be slacking over here. I think it's Descartes. Now, was it David Hume or was it Descartes, or who was it that kind of postulated the potential for nature not being uniform and recognizing that as a principle, like a necessary universal principle to do induction and do logic?
The idea that nature might not be uniform and that this could affect our ability to make universal conclusions through induction is often associated with the philosopher David Hume. Hume was skeptical about the assumption.
Right. Okay, shut up. It is Hume. Yeah. So this is a common Humean conjecture that, oh, we rely on uniformity of nature. We actually have no way to prove that nature will be uniform. So it's a common critique of like atheists, or it's a common skeptic route if you're going to start questioning everything and operate off of only first principles. But you also can't really rely on first principles either, because logic is a category you need to justify in of itself. And yeah, so there you go.
what we're saying is it's very likely.
When you say
evidence in the context of science, we're saying it's very likely.
and when you say it's likely to, what are you basing that on?
We're basing it on priors.
On priors. So if I ask you how you know gravity, if I ask you,
But they're dumb. They don't even get it. He's challenging the principle of uniformity in nature itself. He's saying, how do you know gravity will work the same way tomorrow it did today? Well, because it worked that way in the past. Okay, but why do you think it's going to happen that way in the future? Because it worked that way in the past. Okay, that's not an argument. What's actually happening is your brain, when you say, oh, this is how it worked in the past, therefore it's going to work that way in the future, that argument itself relies on the principle of induction, which necessitates the idea that nature is uniform across time. You're assuming that because something happened a certain way in the past, it's necessarily going to continue that way in the future. The idea that nature is uniform and continuous is the thing at question. So that's question begging, or that's like circular, I guess.
You have to ask a question. If I ask you, how do you know gravity will act tomorrow as it has in the past, what would your answer be?
Again, probability.
But that begs the question.
How's
That is-
what begs my question?
Because I didn't
Are you
ask.
saying that we require certainty? in order to be able
Okay,
to
so
doubt
these dumb Zoomer TikTok kids, they don't even know like basic skeptical propositions and conjectures, like the uniformity of nature. They've never heard this. Like, do they know the how to get an is from an ought? Have they ever heard that one? Have they ever heard like the continuation of substance, right? Like the question of substance, like the boat moving down the river. They've never heard of these.
true claims?
Again, I'm just going to repeat the question, and I'll point out how it's begging the question. I'm trying to. When I say, how do you know gravity will act tomorrow as it has in the past, and then you say, well, it's likely to based on what's happened in the past. I'm not asking about what's happened in the past. I'm asking what's going to happen in the future, aren't I?
It's probability.
And what are you basing the probability on?
Probability.
What are you basing the probability on?
Based upon what's occurred.
So
Right?
based on
It's
the past.
occurred a repetitive level of time.
Am I asking about the past or the future?
Hayden, can I explain to you how this can justify a greater level of probability?
Go for
If
it.
you identify that something happens over and over and over again on a repetitive basis,
It's really dumb.
does that increase the probability that is the cause of
That's question begging. That's the exact thing in question. Because you're assuming that because things occur a certain way in the past, they're going to lead to a continuation of that way in the future. That's assuming the principle of induction. That your it's more probable assumes that it's relying on the idea that things tend to continue, that nature is uniform. So he doesn't get it.
of the action?
Do you just
Can I answer what Parker just asked? Okay, yeah. So if I was to go buy 1,000 red houses, and you ask me what color is the next house going to be, and I say that it's red, because that's what the houses have been in the past, do I know? Really? Or could it be any color?
Wait, no, it could be any
If I flip a coin 100 times and then I flip and I get a heads 100 times and I flip it 101st time, does that necessarily mean it's going to be heads? Or is it a 50-50 chance, right? So do universal rules change just because of things in the past, right? That's another problem too, but this is you guys should know this if you're getting into logic at all. You should know about the skeptics' propositions, like perhaps nature isn't uniform and we can't rely on induction to do things.
color. But what is most likely?
How do you know that it's most likely to be red?
Again, because of the fact that there are priors that indicate the likelihood of it being
So if I flip a coin,
probability.
if I roll a dice, for example, that's 10-sided, and it lands on 10,
There's a problem in induction. I'm not disputing that there's a problem, but that's not a problem in terms of the likelihood or whether or not we can say true things are the case. Right? It is just simply describing that we're not certain.
His chat is helping him.
Do you live like that? Do you live like that?
I live based on probability, right? What are you talking about?
You have a basis for
on this particular point, Hayden is right, mathematically speaking. However, he's obfuscating between two separate positions. So the positions that he's obfuscating between is like a prediction of like gravity existing tomorrow because it exists in fire, and like the prediction of what is going to be true for the next coin flip because the coin flips prior. So like for instance, if you flip a coin like 100 times and the first 50 times you flip it, it lands heads, right? That doesn't increase the probability that landing heads the next, right? And he's trying to use this point to obfuscate to this other point that
That's other knowledge, other priors, other things that could be. We did have that knowledge. We would be able to make that assertion.
No, wrong.
No. If you have knowledge about something, you're going to be able to make a different probabilistic assertion, right? Because evidence points towards a particular thing. That's reasonable for someone to conclude.
It's not probability, it's math. It's based on basic. It's more like logic. It's deeper than probability.
Actually, before we do it, I want to run one thing on you.
Go for it.
Yeah, okay. Do you think you should do as God does?
This was the first 21 minutes of a debate.
Oh, you
that
bum.
lasted
Come pay for my giant thing. Give me $1 million. Let me yap. Who's this guy? This Hayden guy. He had now that was supposed to be a gotcha. He pulled out this like, haha, you can't prove uniformity of nature, which you can do that if you're gonna like challenge an atheist. But really, the thing was supposed to be on abortion. I would have just stuck to abortion. Let's hear his position on abortion.
Here's my current position on abortion. I believe that all human beings are made in God's image from the moment of conception and have a natural right to life that ought to be recognized by the government. I believe that all human beings should be protected equally by law, with no groups of people having special rights to murder other groups of people. I believe that lawmakers ought to restrict abortion as much as is politically possible at all times, with the ultimate goal of equal protection with no exceptions. This means lawmakers should gain as much ground as they can at all times, while never losing sight of equal protection or delaying out of political cowardice. If the gold standard of pro-life policy is equal protection, and that is our ultimate goal, then we should never lie about it. Even though we can't acknowledge that it may not happen for a period of time
True.
due to the current and anticipated political environment. I do believe
Oh, that's a fine position. Yeah, I get it. That's what I would say too. Basically, we understand you're not gonna get like abortion banned everywhere, but do the best you can. Recognize the limitations between application and your principles. Don't basically compromise on your principles just because you can't always get perfect execution of your principles, or you can't get it put into practice. Don't compromise on your principles just because of what's politically feasible or not. But just do what you can. So that was fine. That debate was all over the place. I found that debate was very messy. It was very off topic. He started going about evolution, then he started talking about uniformity in nature, and all he has to really do is say, me as a Christian, I believe that humans have a soul. That soul has immense value placed on it by God that supersedes any other superficial things like what their race is, how intelligent they are they multicellular or not, or based on what biological species they are or not. That's kind of all irrelevant. Really, it's based on the value of the soul planted by God, and that value is asserted by God, and it's a standard above kind of normative biological human standards. And that's kind of the basis I would use. It ultimately does come down to a Christian paradigm. So if you're against an atheist who doesn't really believe in the soul and doesn't believe in innate human value, you actually can't really convince them onto your side without making them Christian. And good Lord, woman. All right, I gotta go. I'm being summoned.